Hello, this is going to be a companion video to my macaron recipe and troubleshooting video. I have a couple pictures and some videos. I'm not going to make all of the macarons on screen, but these are from past batches that I have made. So let's get started. The trickiest thing, in my opinion, after making the meringue is the macaronage, which is mixing the almond sugar mixture into the meringue. And you need to get that as close to the correct consistency as possible if you want your shells to look really nice, but also not have empty pockets in them or spread out too thin. This is an example of not mixed enough. So you can tell that it's not mixed enough because at the sides of the bowl, it's kind of rounded. It's not forming a flat lake kind of surface. And in the center, where you can see that I've been doing the mixing, it's still got the trails from the spatula, and those have not settled back in again. You can tell that you haven't mixed them enough once they're baked, and as you can see on this picture, you can see the markings from my piping. The feet are a bit on the large side, and all of them have little divots at the top because they weren't flowy enough to rest back in and get rid of those markings. The other way you can tell is you'll get some air pockets in the bottom of the cookie because there were more air pockets left from the meringue. These cookies are also a little bit undercooked. You can tell that because they look a little bit squishy on the inside. They don't look like they've had enough of the moisture cooked out of them. This is getting closer to the correct consistency, but it's still not quite mixed enough. You can see that it's not quite as rounded along the edges of the batter. The trails are folding back into the batter a little bit better, but on the finished cookies you can still see some of the piping marks and some of the little divots. However, they do cook better, and I baked them for the correct time in this batch. This batch of cookies was my first solo attempt, so even if you get that messed up, they can still come out tasting amazing. Nobody complained about how they looked. They were just happy with how they tasted. These ones are plain macaron shells, so just almond sugar, egg whites, no flavoring other than that. And for the insides of them, I dyed the buttercream yellow. It's just a vanilla buttercream. And then inside of the buttercream, I piped little dollops of lemon curd. This is an example of almost there. It's pretty close, but as you'll see in the baked cookies, it's still not quite mixed enough. As I lift it up out of the batter, you can see that it's kind of flowing magma-like. If you mix it just a little bit longer than that, it won't break as it falls as much as this is doing, and the batter will dissolve into the mixture as it lands back on top of itself. This is taking a little bit longer than it should. And after I piped them, you can tell that they're still having little divots on the top, even though I've piped all three of these cookie sheets. So those are going to remain a little bit in the end product. If it doesn't smooth over on the sheet itself, it's probably not going to in the oven because they don't really spread that much. So you can see on these cookies, there's some little nubbins on the top where I removed the piping tip, but these are a lot better. They are pretty smooth and glossy on the top. They have cute little feet, and I will show you, I don't think I have a picture of these ones finished completely, but they don't have any air pockets in them, and they're correctly baked for the right amount of time. This is an example of shells that were mixed too much. It's kind of hard to tell, but I can tell because they have spread out farther than the shape of the circle, especially the shell on the bottom right-hand corner. That one is kind of getting oblong and a little bit wider than it ought to. That's an indication that you've mixed them too much and made the batter a little bit less air pockety than it should be. These ones are pretty darn close. There's still a couple of them in there you can see have little dollops on the top, but those actually did end up dissolving back into the cookies as they sat a little bit, and they turned out looking like this. So for the most part, these ones were mixed pretty well, and they're pretty glossy on top. Another thing you might notice is you can see little speckles in the cookies. If you care about this, you should use almond flour that has had the peels of the almond, like the brown outer coating of the almonds, removed. I don't bother because I don't care that much, and so I have little specks of the almond shells or the almond peels showing through in my batter. These ones are also an example of having been a little overcooked. I did very faintly color these ones, but you can tell on some of them that they're starting to look a little bit brown around the edges rather than a flat color. Other than that, though, the mixing on these was pretty close. And you can see that they don't have any air pockets in the middle. They're squishy, but not super squishy, so they're cooked correctly timing-wise. These ones I filled with a chocolate ganache ring on the outside, and then I put little dollops of salted caramel in the middle. The caramel I made was a little bit on the more liquid side than something that you might expect to be wrapped, and that's because I didn't want you to have, a taffy in the middle of the cookie. And so in order to prevent that from oozing out the side of the cookie, because I do let them sit overnight to sort of develop their flavors, you can pipe a ring of the more solid ingredient. So in this case, it's a chocolate ganache around the outside, and then fill it in with the more liquidy ingredient in the center. Another thing that you can do with the cookies, if you're not adding any coloring to them, is do surface designs. This is done before you bake the cookies, and what we've done in this case is made a little liquidy mixture of the red and used a pastry brush or any kind of paintbrush that you can gently drag across the top of the cookie. What you'll want to do for this is pipe the cookies out onto the sheet and then wait just a little bit for them to sort of dry out on the top. If you don't do that, you will end up misshaping them a little bit. But they do end up looking quite cute. These, I believe, were filled with a peppermint ganache, and so the red and white color is to indicate that these are peppermint flavored cookies. When you're storing them, depending on what your fillings are, you can store them in something like a plastic container like you see here. They can be stacked vertically on edge if they're not going to leak all over the place. If I remember correctly, the ones here the pink ones have some kind of jam, I don't remember exactly what, and buttercream on the inside. And the orange ones may have been apricot, or they may have been actually orange flavored. I can't recall. If they are more prone to oozing, you can stack them like this in a container as well. Or if you don't have too many of them, you can put them back on a cookie sheet and cover them with plastic wrap and stick them in the refrigerator like that. If you don't have time to fill them all after they've cooled, you can also put them in a freezer bag like this and just stick them in the freezer, and then they'll last for as long as you need them to before you eat them, but about a month is recommended. The reason you need to keep them in something like a freezer bag is because they will accumulate moisture if your freezer is the kind that does its own defrosting. So you need to protect them from any of the moisture that is in their freezer, or they'll kind of turn a little bit gooey. And when you're ready to fill them, you don't need to let them thaw out or anything. You just take them out of the freezer, fill them, and then stack them as you would with a cookie that you were filling after just having cooled to room temperature. That's all I have for you right now. I'm sure there are tons of videos on YouTube that are better produced than mine is, but I made this in part because I think a lot of people really scare you out of trying the cookies, and I am very sad about that. They're not that difficult as far as I am concerned. I think I would consider myself more of an intermediate baker than a straight up beginner, so I am possibly taking a little bit of my pre-knowledge for granted in saying that. But that being said, even if you get them lumpy or they have air pockets in them, they're still going to taste the same. So I would absolutely encourage you to play around with them and try it, because it's not that hard. It doesn't take a ton of time or supplies or ingredients, and it's far cheaper than what they sell for in ready-made stores. I think I've seen them from anywhere around $2.50 per cookie up to $4 and up, depending on the place. Like that fancy place I can't remember the name of in France, those are really, really pricey just for one cookie. And granted, they do use some fancier, highfalutin ingredients, but it's just like selling cupcakes. They're dirt simple, in my opinion. And if you want them, you can just make a big batch of shells, have some buttercream in your freezer or fridge, and just make one cookie at a time and fill it on demand. So yeah, go nuts. Play around, experiment. What could possibly go wrong?